Welcome to Exploring Axon, a podcast where we discuss Axon Framework, Axon Server, and their ecosystem. I am your host and the producer of this podcast, Sara. Welcome to the second part of my conversation with Shopey Rahmani. In this part, we focused more on Axon products and how they've helped him and his team in their efforts to move to faster and more reliable systems, as well as the topic of communication within large teams. I hope you enjoy this part of our conversation, and let's have a listen. Throughout the years, though, you have tried to improve it or have tried to take some of the functionality out of it and put them into more modernized systems. And you do use patterns such as CQRS and event sourcing and things like that. How has the progress been? And can you tell me a little bit about why killing of System A is, I mean, obviously there, as you mentioned, there's hardware that's connected to the system. There's 100 other systems integrated with this. So getting rid of it is extremely difficult. But do you see at some point in the future that that can be a possibility and that the costs that are now involved with keeping this system running are higher than if you just kill it and then move all of the integration into another modern system?
So, I mean, in every migration you do, sometimes there's a motivation to replace that system with no other business benefits, and that usually is hard to sell.
Right.
So the strategy has always been like, we want to do this, and it's not possible in this old system. Here are the business benefits, and so you have to sell it that way, and then you get business onboarded, and we have a target. And in that journey, indirectly, it would mean that you have to replace that old system. And so,
and by you have to sell it, you mean you have to sell it to the management, basically. You have to sell the idea.
Right. You have to get the first of all, your nearest kind of people that deals with business questions onboarded, such as business analysts and other type of analysts. And then you have to also sell it to your product owner and the ones that
your
have
team members as well.
Team members.
Yeah.
Why this is a good idea, because a lot of people are not so happy about change. Doesn't matter what it is. And you have to kind of convince them, hey, let's start from scratch. Let's deal with all the pains from the beginning. And that's sometimes not so fun for everybody. But, and yeah, so it's a bit of a challenge to do that. But so, I mean, the journey has been that 1985, of course, computers were maybe invented a few years before that, but it was very close to the invention of computers, and personal computers were mainstream maybe around 2000 in my eyes, at least. But maybe 95, somewhere there. But when we built System B, we were highly influenced by domain-driven design. So Greg Young comes a few years after that. Yeah. So
Eric
Evans, thank you. Yeah. So Eric Evans, he wrote this book 2003 and kind of influenced us in moving into domain-driven design. So in the System B, we try to capture the various domains, but we did a few mistakes there in retrospect. And we ended up with big monolithical domains. So solutions, there was like one domain connected to one service. The lesson we learned there was that, okay, so now we went from System A having yearly releases or half a year releases to System B that could have quarterly releases. But then you had to deal with a whole bunch of release management and deployment management and, you know, all the kind of admin that comes along with that. So, and what we saw that, okay, so if you have one domain, one service, and that domain happens to be big, a lot of the changes that comes in change requests will mean that almost all developers will be sitting and coding on the same code base, and they would
Mhm.
collide. And they would collide, so it would mean that we cannot push, time to market would be slow. And that,
Yep.
of course, is not good. Just a side note is that the project size is in 3 digits.
Okay.
So usually we would have somewhere around 100 to 400 people
Yeah.
um, working and coding and
On the
uh,
same monolith.
on the same monolith.
Oh my God. Okay.
And
Hopefully in
I,
the same time zone though.
yeah,
But at this point, I
it
think
was yeah.
it's
So
okay.
at some, yeah, we had also from different time zones at some point
Oh.
later on. But the funny thing was that so you would have, of course, a lot of juniors, a lot of people that didn't know the code base, and
Mhm.
we didn't have pull requests back then. No, that kind of collaboration was not in place. The
Yeah.
culture was not there. So you would have people like, I would do refactoring of one code base. And I was like, oh, that's great. I fixed that. And then I would have around 200 commits. Uh,
Oh my
that was the other direction. And I had to like, oh no, I fixed one, but I got
jeez.
200 new problems to deal with.
Yeah.
So you learn that, yeah, okay, so I might know as an individual some patterns, some good practices, but it doesn't scale that I know it. I have to spread
Mhm.
this out to my colleagues. I have to make sure that everybody works the same way I work. So that was a learning for me to understand that, yeah, so you might know a few things, but um, you have to make sure that your colleagues are also on the same boat. And
Yeah.
that way you move faster.
So I'm gonna come back to the communication side of things a little bit later as well. But um, in this particular time era, how do you communicate with a 200-ish team? Do you have like daily huddles? I mean, do you say, "Hey guys, we have 65 issues, and you 10 go work on this"? You 10 go. How do you manage and organize that?
Um, I mean, around the same time, I think we have this. Um, is it Sutherland that came up with Scrum? I think it's, yeah, that's probably his name. I don't know his first name, but we were influenced by Scrum and
Mhm.
Agile ways of working. So that was something we thought would solve our problem to get rid of all the meetings we had. So we started to have various Scrum, and we went into all kind of Scrum rabbit holes. This is
Mhm.
not Scrum, or that is Scrum, and you know all the,
I can
those
imagine.
kind of discussions, morning meetings, Scrum of Scrums, and uh, yeah. But I mean, in the end, what we realized is that we need to have smaller teams, and
Mhm.
some of the some of the integrations we've done really need um, 200 people. It's just
Mhm.
a configuration, and they they just throw money at it because uh, if you have a deadline in, let's say, a month, and all you have to do is a configuration, then that's probably a solution. It's not a
Mhm.
good solution, but it would work.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it is. It's a bit challenging. The I forgot your. I'm not answering your question. I think
No,
I
no,
lost
it's
my
fine.
track.
No,
Yes.
you actually you did because it was in terms of how do you organize this these many problems or issues and things like that in a big team, and how do you manage that communication? Which, yes, you absolutely did answer that question. Which you adopted Scrum, and then the Scrum of Scrums, and then ultimately
Right.
decided to break the teams
Yeah.
into smaller groups.
Sure. I mean, so yeah, yeah. So just to say a few words about more about that, is that it didn't solve the problem
Hmm.
unnecessarily. I mean, it just made it a bit more manageable, but it
Right.
was still there is overhead of maintaining 100 people and so on. So um, I wouldn't say that we solved it. We just learned to deal with it. And when you work in an organization as such size, you get used to things moving very slowly. Um,
Hmm.
and then, as I was trying to So one example I maybe mentioned is that uh, I requested, since we were in 4 time zones at the same time, I said, hey, why don't we put a clock on the wall? And that entire process took a year, and it ended up in a different wall somewhere else. And
So you were basically asking, can we just put four clocks, like physical clocks, on this
physical,
wall
yeah,
so that
exactly,
we can just keep an eye on who's working at which time zone? And that
exactly,
took a
yeah,
year, and it ended up in the wrong
in the wrong spot,
place
and
anyways. Yeah.
exactly. So you learn to
Oh my
be very
goodness.
patient with everything. Yeah.
Hmm. And I think patient with yourself as well, because I can see myself in a situation like that getting so frustrated and stressed out and like, why isn't it moving? Well, I think hence I work for a smaller company, which is less hierarchical. And yeah. So speaking of hierarchical, so as you mentioned, things have to be moved at a certain rate, which is very slow rate, but also through various layers of management and who's going to approve this request and so on. Um, as with the technologies that you're adapting on a regular basis, I'm assuming, and you are early adapters, for instance, for domain driven design patterns, or as you mentioned, for Scrum. So you are a team that is looking out for these new technologies that are coming out, and you are trying to take advantage of these to help make the project move more smoothly, or resolve problems that you have at hand. How has the adoption been for you in terms of the speed and the rate that they are approved?
Um, what do you mean by that?
So, for instance, if you want to use a new technology, let's say, hey, we want to use a framework because it's going to make our lives easier. Do you get the approval from, let's say, the project owner or other people involved in, say, paying the bill for this framework, for instance?
Hmm.
Is that a quicker process, or do you still have to go through months of waiting before something is resolved? And by the time that is approved, another technology has popped up that's going to help you even more with the problem.
Um, I think yes and no.
So my favorite answer, it depends, I
Yeah,
guess.
it depends. It definitely depends on who's doing what exactly. So in early on, me and my colleagues learned the lesson that some of these technical upgrades should not be a decision outside of the team,
Mhm.
and so we kind of negotiated that into having the liberty of choosing as long as we deliver. Um,
Okay, so there is autonomy within the team.
so we negotiated that into the team.
Okay.
I wouldn't
Yes.
say there is constantly being kind of poked and so on, but as far as I think some of us are around, we will not let that change. And
Mhm.
of course, to a certain extent, you can do decisions, but when it comes to license and costs like that, that needs to be escalated and kind of approved higher up. Um, but it depends who does it. So I mean, that goes back a little bit to who is asking. And in some of the things that we did was branding. So
Mhm.
we branded ourselves as um, by proving that our solutions worked. And when we were asking for it, there was a little doubt that it was for just playing around, and
Yeah.
there was some trust
Mhm.
that okay, it's being asked by this team, so most likely they definitely need it.
Mhm.
And a lot of the let's say mainstream tools or bleeding edge technologies that I have seen and dealt with is maybe not needed by a small scale solution.
Mhm.
But when you're dealing with global problems, you're also dealing also at a higher scale. You have maybe 2,000 services. How do we do a dependency upgrade in 2,000 services? All of a sudden, that's a lot of work. I mean, if you have 5 services, nobody cares. It's just a small kind of upgrade. But if you have 2,000, then you need to you need to automate this. You need to think about, okay, how do we not do this again? If you have this log4j, just we had that as a reference.
Oh,
Like,
yes, I remember that.
just imagine that.
Even
So
in five services, it caused a lot of problem for a lot of people. But yeah, I
exactly,
can
yeah.
imagine.
So I will have a lot of those occurrences, and we need to come up with a way of not doing this manual work. So I think we did some early versions of a bot that went and did these changes for us. And this was long before the plugins such as Dependabot and
Yeah.
Dependency Bot and so on came. So we did this internally because we wanted to focus on the right things. So we invested as a team to automate. And I think automation was one of the first things that helped us to push on and be successful and try to win the war with this 1985 solution.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's yeah, it depends.
Yeah, exactly. Makes sense. And it should depend. I mean, we're talking about a system that's very old and a team that's very big, and various solutions can be put into resolving a problem or several problems in this case. Has there been a time that you decided on a solution, maybe think several years ago, and you sold the idea to your team and everybody else, and everybody was on board with it? And now, today, looking back and thinking, that was not the right solution. How do we improve this? And then you have to, uh, yet again, sell another idea to some of these team members that I understand have still been with the company decades. And maybe they look at you and say, well, that was your solution, or that was your team's solution several years ago. How come you want to change it now? Well, obviously, especially being in the software world, things change quite rapidly. How
Right.
do you convince people that, yeah, at the time that was the best idea, but now we have to change it? Do you ever get this question of like, but that's your solution, or that was your team's solution, so you deal with it?
Yeah, a variation of that I do get. So I mean, so the System B has a lot of kind of, let's say, my design in it, and around 2016 we went on and built another system, System C. In System B, there is currently around maybe 40 people working. And System C was also something that I was highly involved in and built and designed. And that was almost 8 years ago or more, 2016. That's +4. Yeah, so this was more than 8 years ago. And then I left and started working on a new variation of the same System D. Now, when I go back and try to address some of the issues we have in System B, where the 40 people are sitting, they don't even know that I have been involved.
Okay.
But
So that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. But they are highly motivated in selling my ideas to myself. And it's a bit of an out-of-body experience, because it's like you have built a castle and you know exactly all the secret rooms, and
Yeah.
another tenant has moved in and they don't necessarily know why those rooms are there. And you tell them you don't need that, and they're like, yeah, we do it. It's there for this reason. And we're like, no, that's not why we built it. And we have a lot of conversations in that way.
Yeah. Do you
So
ever reveal that that was your idea, or do you just keep it
sometimes I do
as
get frustrated and I say, hey guys, this is something I did, but I try to avoid that because I'm
Yeah,
not
sure.
proud of it. It's like, at the same time you're shooting yourself and saying that I did those mistakes, or I'm yeah. But I mean, everybody, anything we do a few months back is probably horrible in any developer's eyes. We do tend to progress,
Of course.
hopefully in the right direction.
I mean, looking at it in normal life, I would not make the decisions I made 20 years ago, even though at the time they seemed like a good idea. Now I'm looking
Yeah.
back, I'm like, did I really say that or do that? You know how I'm unfortunately part of Facebook, but sometimes you see these like, oh, you this memory happened 10 years ago, and I read through some of the stuff that I wrote. I'm like, oh my god, did I really write this? You know, that's the same situation that, you know, anytime you make a decision, it probably is a good idea at the time, but then you look at back at it 10 years, may not be the best idea right now in this state. So I don't think there's anything wrong with, hey, we did this in the system, and now we just have to change it because there are better things available, there are better solutions, and let's move on with the times. Um, I did ask this question, but I'm not sure if we got to the, and I don't know if there's a yes or no answer to this, but this system A, do you think it will ever die? Or do you foresee it going on for another 4 decades?
So I've come to believe that it will, and the reason for that is that as long as the systems are more or less replacing themselves in let's call it just new technology, same function, same idea, then it will be hard to replace it. But if the technology is capturing a new behavior, so for instance, web is mainstream now. When we built that system A, it was not. It was meant for some other reason, more kind of a human to human interaction. And now we're kind of driving it into this new uh, web uh, and highly integrated, highly connected to the customer. Customer is connected to the store as if they are the coworker. They can do whatever the coworker can do, more or less, with small differences. And the behavior has changed a lot. It's more of a journey now than before. It was just an order. Now it's a journey for the customer, and they will come back and they will do other things. So when these things happen, the fundamentals will change. And when the fundamentals change, it's like, as an analogy, we were using Newton's law and now we moved on to Einstein. So
Right.
the physical laws have changed so that you cannot no longer rely on Newton. So you would just move on.
Right.
And that has been happening now with System D, which I'm involved in, where we're using event sourcing and event-driven architecture. The fundamentals has changed. We have new possibilities, and that has allowed us to question some of the behaviors in the application.
Mm-hmm.
Simple example is that you would have a CRUD system where it would save an order, and you would have a button called save order. Now, if you capture the small steps, for instance, add item, add services, and so on, what does save order do? What does it do? I mean, before it was making sure that this huge object capturing all your items and everything was saved to the persistence layer.
Mm-hmm.
But now you do that in smaller steps. So the save goes away. I don't need that in the same way. And that has a ripple effect, as a small example, in the usability of the application and in the workflow. So that eventually means that we don't need to rely on the System A anymore. And we also don't need to, some of the insights also with events and commands and all those other message types is that they are synchronous, and you don't necessarily need the synchronicity to connect with. And then some of these applications, you can deal with them later on, and that
Right.
later on can be doesn't need to be, you don't have the same demands on them, so you can scale them down. You can shut down a few things, and we don't need to buy the latest computers for those. So it just kind of calms down, maybe fades out. I don't think it will be like a logarithmic curve, I think, to
Mm-hmm.
System A. I don't
Yeah.
think it will completely go away, but it will go away to the extent where we're almost there.
There's less dependency on it, which
Sure.
is
Yeah.
and so from my understanding is that you're now trying at least to take a lot of the logic that, or the business logic that was inside of system A, out of it and put it in more distributed places where you can play around with how those other systems are functioning or integrating with one another, and what is downstream or what is upstream, and that way you can um, rely on system A much less. Instead, you can make other systems more independent of one another, and only when needed, really communicating with each other. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, so that's for sure the that's what we're seeing. So
Mhm.
the reliance is removed, and we can put other systems as the main um, uh, fronts. So
Mhm.
one example where I would say things have changed a lot when moving into this event-driven architecture. If we're just moving into that system D a little
Mhm.
bit, is that before, as an analogy, again, you have to stop me if it doesn't make sense, but
Sure.
so we would force you, if you would want to mail a package to some end user, we would force you to stay in that post office until the mail has arrived, and then we
Mhm.
would let you go. Whereas what we're doing now is that we give you a receipt and we say you're free, and then we mail it. I mean, that's how the mail and parcels work, right? So you don't force
Mhm.
people to stay there, but we did. So
Yeah.
when you saved an order, we force the end user, consumer of this API or the client to wait
Yeah.
until we've saved it into thousands of downstream sources, and then we would give it thumbs up. We did it.
Mhm.
And that would be like 2.5 seconds on average later, or it would be like 10 seconds later.
Uh-huh.
Whereas now, what we do is we just generate a GUID and
Mm.
give it back. And here's your GUID, here's your receipt. You can follow up on this order, but we'll deal with the saving in our own pace, and you
Right.
can check up on that. So the experience have changed a lot.
Yeah.
It's
I can
perceived
imagine
much
it's a
faster.
lot faster as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. So going back to your earlier question about selling this to management,
Mhm.
one of the early POCs we had to do on this was basically showing the idea is going to work. And so we had this performance of 2.5 seconds to save an order to beat. And
Mhm.
we basically generated a GUID and returned that. And we went from 2.5 seconds to an average of 40 milliseconds.
Oh,
Um,
that's huge.
that's a huge difference. And it was like, so all the monitoring and observability tools we have would show the graphs as a stock market crash, because the response time was so low that it looked like a flat line,
Mhm.
uh, and
Because nothing's happening.
nothing is happening. What is going on? And and the other charts were also there because we didn't roll it out everywhere at the same time. We just rolled it out to a specific region. So you would
Mhm.
see the old system versus this new system. And somebody calculated what the performance was. It was somewhere in the 2,500% better.
Oh.
So in the journey of building system D,
Mhm.
we um, we were quite tired of building infrastructure.
Mhm.
And every time you rebuild the same system, some of the old infrastructure will repeat itself. Oh, we have to have this and that, and what we want to deal with is replace all the features and not deal with the uh, infrastructure. And that's kind of a cloud native thinking as well. So
Mhm.
how do we use the tools we have and not build our own infrastructure? And in the cloud uh, uh, vendor we went with, it didn't have the a lot of, I mean, I think almost all of them don't have an event store.
Mhm.
Not the way you would think. And it doesn't scale well, and we don't want to deal with that.
Mhm.
So that's where we kind of touched on the Axon um, products. And also, when looking at the uh, solution, so we kind of learned that we don't want to do a normal traditional three-tier architecture because we have to sacrifice on a whole bunch of, we have to basically compromise on either improving our read or write.
Mhm.
And which one is most important? Well, it depending which flow you're in. And all our flows are used um, depending on who is doing what. So for refunds, maybe the read is the write is more, and for uh, order creation is also right. But customers from their end, they might do a whole bunch of reviewing of their orders. So it was a hard choice to make. So then we kind of moved into this CQRS, and not necessarily. I mean, so the strategy is always to look at the problem and then choose the tools,
Right.
and not the opposite way. So
Mhm.
we looked at the problem and then chose the tools that were closest, and one of them was CQRS, then in this case as a pattern. And that also meant that we had to build a few um, supports to make it easy for us.
Mhm.
There we found the Axon framework to be the most kind of having the biggest community.
Mhm.
And
So did you start, sorry to interrupt you, but did you start to build something in-house first when you found out about CQRS, or you thought, hey, this is a good pattern to use, let's look to see what tools are out there?
um, mm, so the first iteration of um, the event sourcing was when we were doing system B.
Oh, okay, so that was a
Um,
while ago.
yeah, so
Yeah.
2009, Greg Young and Udi Dahan, when they were
Mhm.
doing this presentations, we got into it was interesting, but we had such a big system and
Mhm.
it just didn't make sense. So we did some POCs here and there with various results, some of them in .NET, where we would use some frameworks that people have built and kind of improved on them.
Mhm.
Um, but this time around, we there was so many variables that we had to kind of play with. So the Axon seemed to be at least something that was proven, and we didn't have to worry about it.
Mhm.
So it was a steady variable, so that we can focus on everything else.
Makes sense, right? And then moving towards the what you mentioned earlier about you looked at the cloud provider that you were using at the time and looking at others, and in terms of storing the data, or you were interested in event sourcing, and none of them did have that event store that was dedicated event store for the purpose of saving the events and having access to them quickly or replaying them and so on. You start using Axon framework, and through that then became familiar with Axon server and then decided to give that a try, or was it a different process for you?
Um, I think um, the event store came first for us because I mean that was
Mhm.
what was missing. Everything else we could potentially build,
Right.
um, and you could also build the event store yourself, but it's slightly out of scope for the project, and it would mean that we'd spend years on something that wouldn't really be in the right direction. So
Sure.
we compared the event store of Axon and also the other event store, which is called Event Store.
Yeah.
Um, and there are different approaches. I think what kind of ended up for us to choose this one was the framework support,
I see.
whereas the other one didn't have it. So we were kind of still had to build the framework, and the community is slightly weaker.
Yeah.
And strategically, it's simpler to get everyone onboarded on something that is stronger in the
Mhm.
community, has license, has support, because
Right.
then you can get support on questions you don't have the answer to. And
Mhm.
I considered our team as toddlers. I mean, even though, yes, you've read how to swim, but you don't know what's going to happen when you get into the water. So
Yeah.
it was same thing for us. I mean, so we've done a lot of event-driven architecture, uh, but still, I would say that we didn't know what we were doing. So it was good to get into um, this community to get some real answers of somebody that has done this and has experience.
Yeah. And you did hint to the topic of um, going basically from and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was the matter of receiving that receipt, for instance, that you said it would save, and you would give the receipt then to the user or customer in 2.5 seconds, and then it went into 14 milliseconds using the different technology because it was asynchronous, and you didn't have to wait for everything to be saved and then give that receipt to. Um, so this sort of 2,400, 2,500% improvement, um, did Axon Server help with that? Or did you sort of try this through other things and got to that improvement through other tools?
Um, I don't think, I mean, so Axon Server is doing this events storage, but the
Mhm.
event-driven architecture was mainly, I think, credited for that
Framework.
part.
Yeah, yeah.
But there are other aspects of the solution where you could say that Axon Server has helped us, and that's in the way of working with this technology,
Mhm.
way of
Mhm.
thinking about it, and also to remove some of the concerns. So I think the Axon Server was there as a foundation, as part of the stack, but
Mhm.
the solutioning was not, Axon Server did not in any way say you should solve it this way.
Sure.
Uh, so I think that came. I mean, that could still be done without Axon Server. We could still do a grid generation and give it to the customer. But I think all other aspects of it is where we get the muscles from Axon Server.
Gotcha, gotcha. So it's a sort of a combination of various, not just tools, but also habits, if I can call it that, and sort of adapting various thoughts on how to optimize this. We did talk a little bit about communication earlier, about having a big team and how do you organize things and communicate with the team. Talking about this date in 2023, I'm assuming you don't just have 200 developers or 400 developers, you probably have thousands at this point, and working in various time zones and things like that. And um, with your team specifically, you now live in a vastly different time zone. How do you manage these communications and how do you manage these? Because you are, again, talking about changing technologies and moving towards different maybe patterns and uh, selling your ideas or convincing people. Being now in a distributed team as well, not just distributed systems, how do you manage that?
So I think, going back to what I said earlier, is that making sure the team members are almost as um, thinking in the same way as everybody else. We are in the same coherent understanding of what we want. Making sure that, for instance, our pull requests have a certain level of quality and expectation. Making sure that we have some automation in place that would catch if somebody is not following some standards. That removes the immediate need of, for instance, somebody being there as a police. So that removes the need of us being connected to each other synchronously, if I want to call it
Mm-hmm.
that, right? And we've also removed we call it decoupled the Scrum Master. We don't have a Scrum Master. We don't work with Scrum anymore. We've just thrown out the entire um, word. We don't use it. We just pick things from it. And right now we're doing something, I would say, along the lines of agile. And we started with nothing. We started with no meetings. And we saw that, hey, if we have a chance of talking once a week, we'll talk for hours. Something is
Yeah.
wrong. So we added a little piece of the agile way of working twice a week, and we found this good level of 3 times a week syncing, as we call it.
Right.
And then we have also these new tools that we are using, such as Slack and so on, that kind of removes a lot of the mail chains. The and so a new kind of development that I have started to believe in is that some of the meetings are a bug. So
I like that. I am so going to steal that from you and use it.
I mean, the way I think about it is that, okay, so why do we need this meeting? Is it because we don't have good enough explanation? Am I here just to explain how things work? And if I'm here just to explain that, we just need a good manual, or we need some better tutorials. And so going in with that mentality in every meeting and saying, okay, so this is potentially a bug, shouldn't be here,
Right.
but let's deal with it. And some of them you have workarounds, you just attend the meeting and so on. But not all meetings are bugs, but most of them are.
Yeah.
And so trying to kind of capture those problems and automating them. So we have, for instance, a team member joins. We have a automated bot that greets that team member, and it takes them through the journey of installing and whatever they need and accesses, who they should contact. And in the end, they have a running service in their machine, and they're good to go, and they know basics of various aspects of the system. And that usually takes a couple of days. Same thing is under progress for our consumers. So since we're doing an API layer in system D only, and the applications, the UI parts are separate projects, we are essentially having them as our consumers, and we're trying to improve their journey. So that would be a separate automation for them.
Right.
And yeah, so working in that way has been kind of
That's really great, because now you're taking care of onboarding, whether it's a team member or a user, much easier. And yeah, absolutely. I think asynchronous communication is a lifesaver for distributed teams, because for me, for most of my team members, I'm 7 hours behind. So by the time I get my working day started, they're pretty much done with their working day. So I get on Slack and I see all of the messages. It usually takes me a couple hours to just go through everything. But then it gives me a clear idea of, okay, so we're here, and this is the way forward, which is really nice. So that's really, really great that those tools exist nowadays that make it possible for us to work from anywhere, basically, and still be connected very much with each other. Really great insight. I think at some point, Shopey, you may want to consider writing a book on your experiences of working with a system that's 40 some years old. Now I have to ask you this. Does anyone who worked initially on the 1985 System A, are there anyone who's still with the company?
Yes, there is actually one or two.
Okay.
And they, I mean, that's amazing that they have been able to. So, I mean, as a software engineer, one of the key core skills we have is to be able to learn and learn fast. And the better you do that, the more kind of adaptable you are.
Right.
And these two are definitely one of those. So they've gone from Pascal to C++, from C++ to .NET,
.NET,
.NET
Java.
to Java, from Java to Kotlin, and changing. Also, I mean, they it's funny, when you talk to them, they also sometimes say, "Oh, this is a fashion. We've seen this before. This came at this era," and they start to talk about the connections. And it's
Hmm.
funny that we do have also, like, reoccurring events in software development that they come and go.
Yeah.
So we have front end focus, and then we have back end focus. We have client driven versus back end driven, and it
Hmm.
comes and goes like that. And yeah, so they're still around.
This is amazing. I mean, it's the amount of knowledge these individuals have. It's just really fascinating. It's vast, and I've heard that from a lot of architects as well, who are in their third or fourth decade of their career journey in software, and they always hint at, "Oh, this is not a new thing." That people think it's just a new thing that came up yesterday. This existed in the 70s and 80s. We just kind of forgot about it. And it's really fascinating to hear those and see that what we believe as new trends actually existed a long time ago. And they're just kind of
Yeah. So I mean,
a lot of times repeating themselves.
I have some battles of my own with new kind of developers. Like, let's say new developers are those who worked for 5 and 10 years. Um, they don't necessarily know anything about domain driven design.
Hmm.
There's a lot of like, why do we need this? Um, and I think Robert C. Martin said something about that every 5 years the number of software engineers doubles. So
Hmm.
so we are, let's say, 1 million now. I don't know how many we are, but just as an example, then in 5 years there will be 2 million. But then it gets a bigger ocean of people who didn't
People who
know
don't know.
anything. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's difficult. And they produce a lot of articles out there, and yeah, so we have to kind of, yeah, help out with that.
Absolutely. Which is a huge task in it itself, but a
Sure,
good one, right? It's always nice to have that opportunity for folks to learn, and this is why we're doing this podcast, right?
sure,
To
yeah.
help them also understand some of these patterns better. Fantastic, Shopey. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your experience, all of your learnings throughout your journey with everybody. I really appreciate that, and you do have a lot that we didn't even get to talk about today, but I hope that we come back and dive a little bit deeper into some of these topics with you at a future time. But I want to appreciate you being here today and spending some time with me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hope to talk to you guys again.
Absolutely. Have a great one.
Thank you.
I do hope you enjoyed our conversation. Please join me next time for more amazing topics with wonderful guests. Until then, have a great time and happy coding.